Devron, Drex. Cole built his empire in silence, ruling South London with shadowy precision, while Feek, Molloy turned Dublin's underworld into a web of blackmail, ports, and power. When their worlds collided, trust lasted only seconds, and betrayal rewrote the criminal map of the UK and Ireland forever. In the heart of South London, beneath the glimmer of glass towers and redevelopment projects, the borough of Southwark hid a dark, invisible empire. For nearly a decade, this territory was under the silent rule of a street gang known as the Smoke Boys. Unlike other gangs that flaunted power through music, flashy cars, or viral videos, the Smoke Boys did the opposite. They stayed in the shadows, building their empire with caution and cold precision. At the top was a man rarely seen but deeply feared. Devon Cole, known on the streets as Drex. Drex grew up on the Brandon estate, where survival meant learning fast and trusting no one. His father was never around, and his mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. By the age of 12, Drex had already mastered the rules of the streeting. Observe everything, say nothing, and never show weakness. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest, but people followed him. There was something in his eyes. Calm, sharp, unbothered. When he formed the Smoke Boys in his late teens, he handpicked his crew not by muscle, but by discipline. Loyalty was non-negotiable. The gang operated like a silent machine. Their drug trade was structured with layers so deep even law enforcement struggled to find the source. Young kids, called peddles, handled street-level sales. They had no idea who they were working for. Above them were the branches. Mid-level runners who managed distribution and moved product between barouts. At the top were roots, a small circle of 5 men who answered only to Drex. One of them, Kyle Benson, known as Trigger, was the enforcer, strategist, and most trusted lieutenant. If Drex was the brain, Trigger was the iron fist. But what made the Smoke Boys truly untouchable was their connection to the inside. Deep within the Metropolitan Police, an anonymous source leaked information to the gang. Known only as Unit 7, this person tipped off Drex whenever raids were planned or surveillance was underway. Unit 7 wasn't feeding them scraps. They were feeding them blueprints. With that kind of protection, the Smoke Boys always stayed 2 steps ahead. Raids ended in empty stash houses. Arrests failed in court due to missing evidence. Rival gangs were eliminated before they could make a move. The only challenge the Smoke Boys faced came from the south, a group called the Croydon Hounds. Loud, reckless, and hungry for territory, the Hounds believed their aggressive tactics could shake the Southwark Empire. They began pushing into Elephant and Castle, robbing street dealers and tagging walls with their dog head insignia. For a few weeks, it looked like war was coming. But Drex didn't respond with gunfire or public displays. Instead, he disappeared. So did Trigger. So did 3 of the Hound's top men. No shots were heard. No police reports were filed. The Hound's operations suddenly stopped. Their dealers vanished, and their safe houses were abandoned. It was as if someone had pressed delete on their existence. Southwark fell silent again, and the dog tags were painted over with black smoke symbols. Word on the street was that the Smoke Boys had found the Hound's location using Unit 7's intel and handled the rest with surgical silence. In private circles, Drex was described as someone who had no limits. But not because of violence. His true strength was his mind. He ran the gang like a business, outsourcing laundering to small tech firms, using crypto wallets to clean money, and storing product in abandoned flats owned by offshore shell companies. He didn't just beat the system. He learned how to become invisible within it. Yet, for all their discipline, the Smoke Boys were not without cracks. Trigger had begun to question certain moves. Drex's obsession with silence, the growing risk of trusting a cop, and the fear that one slip could ruin everything. While loyalty kept them together, fear held it in place. And fear, as powerful as it is, doesn't last forever. Unknown to them, a different crew across the Irish Sea was watching closely. They had heard about the silent gang in Southwark that dismantled rivals without making headlines. They saw potential not in war, but in control, and they were preparing for a move that would shake both sides of the border. But the Smoke Boys, nestled deep in South London, had no reason to look to Dublin. Not yet. They believed they had Southwark locked. What they didn't realize was that empires built in silence collapse the loudest. On the outskirts of Dublin, far from the tourist, packed streets of Temple Bar and the glowing offices of tech giants, a different kind of empire was rising. The Red Eye Circle wasn't born on the streets. It was forged in the ruins of the city's old crime families. When the O'Shea brothers were gunned down in 2013 and the Kavanagh crew fell apart over internal betrayal, a power vacuum spread across Dublin's underworld. From the chaos emerged a new face, one that nobody recognized but everyone feared. His name was Fiachra Malloy, though no one ever dared call him that. On the streets, he was known only as Feek. Feek didn't look like a gangster. He wore tailored suits, carried a gold fountain pen, and kept his hair combed back with surgical precision. He didn't raise his voice or threaten anyone directly. Instead, he used calm language, soft gestures, and a gaze that left people unsure whether they were being offered a deal or warned of death. Feek believed that violence was useful, but only if it was efficient. He didn't need to shout. His enforcer, Eamon Sledge, really made sure of that. Sledge was a former professional boxer who'd been banned from the sport after nearly killing an opponent in the ring. With hands the size of bricks and a jaw that had never been broken, Sledge handled the Red Eye Circle's dirty work. When someone crossed the crew, Sledge showed up, not to kill, at least not usually, but to leave a lasting message. Broken fingers, crushed kneecaps, eyes swollen shut for weeks. The crew didn't need to make examples often because one was usually enough. But what made the Red Eye Circle more powerful than the gangs before them was how Feek changed the game. He didn't just rely on drug trafficking. He built a diverse portfolio: human smuggling, arms dealing, and blackmail. The port of Cork was his main artery. Containers filled with Eastern European workers, stolen weapons from war zones, and occasionally luxury cars moved in under the radar. Dock workers were paid well to stay quiet, and port officials were either bribed or blackmailed into obedience. Feek also had influence in unexpected places. Small-time politicians, local judges, even a couple of reporters owed him favors or feared what he might reveal. He kept files on everyone: photos, bank transfers, private calls, stored in encrypted drives hidden across the country. He didn't just build a crew, he built a web. Despite his reach, Feek was careful. He rarely traveled the same road twice, rotated safe houses weekly, and never used mobile phones. His crew used burner devices that were destroyed every 72 hours. No one below a certain level even knew what he looked like. Most only saw Sledge or dealt through middlemen like a Darag Meeks, a cold-eyed trafficker who kept the Red Eye's routes flowing like clockwork. But even with this level of control, Feek couldn't predict what was coming. The first sign of trouble came in the form of silence. A shipment bound for Liverpool worth over €1 million in heroin went dark. The ship reached port, but the product was gone. No one had seen anything, no alarms, no violence, just clean theft. When Feek's men investigated, they found a single clue left inside one of the empty crates, a black flame symbol drawn in permanent marker. It meant nothing to them at first, but one of the younger Red Eye runners had seen it before. It was the mark used by the Smoke Boys, a South London gang known for never leaving evidence, never speaking publicly, and always hitting with precision. Feek didn't react with rage. He held a private meeting in an empty farmhouse with Sledge and Darai, laying out what he'd learned. He didn't care about the lost drugs. Those could be replaced. What bothered him was the message. The Smoke Boys weren't just stealing, they were signaling. That meant they were expanding. Possibly into Irish turf. Possibly into his ports. Feek knew that the time for observation was over. He began preparing. Routes were adjusted, new alliances were reviewed, safe houses were armed. Feek even reached out to old enemies, offering temporary truces in case a larger war was coming. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the underground. Gangs from Galway to Limerick started watching their backs. If the Red Eye Circle and the Smoke Boys were headed toward conflict, the shockwaves would tear through more than just Dublin or London. This would be different, quieter, smarter, but much more dangerous. Feek didn't blink. He had risen from nothing, watched giants fall, and created something bigger than a gang. To him, the Smoke Boys weren't a threat. They were a test, and he had no plans to fail. In the middle of the United Kingdom, away from the flashing blue lights of London and the crumbling docks of Dublin, the city of Birmingham became the unlikely stage for what would become a pivotal moment in the underground war between two empires. For decades, Birmingham had been a city where criminal groups passed through but rarely stayed. It was neutral ground, untouched by any one syndicate, with its own quiet street networks, but none with the power or ambition of the Smoke Boys or the Red Eye Circle. That was why it was chosen for the meeting. The man responsible for organizing the encounter was Nasir Dalal, known as Crown. Born and raised in Handsworth, Crown wasn't a gangster in the traditional sense. He didn't run drugs or carry weapons. He ran information. For years, he operated as a middleman between different gangs, exchanging secrets, leaks, blackmail, and logistics. He didn't owe loyalty to any one group. His loyalty was to balance and to profit. If violence could be avoided, he made sure both sides benefited. But if war was unavoidable, Crown ensured he was the first to know which way the wind was blowing. When the Red Eye Circle lost their Liverpool shipment and identified the black flame symbol left behind, Feek reached out to Crown discreetly. The message was clear: arrange a face with the Southwark crew. Crown didn't hesitate. He knew a confrontation between these two was inevitable, and he saw a unique opportunity, not just immediate but to profit. If he played his cards right, he could place himself at the center of the largest criminal collaboration the UK had ever seen. He contacted Drex through trusted channels. Despite being cautious by nature, Drex was not a fool. He understood that if Feek was willing to talk instead of retaliate, it meant something larger was at stake. Drex brought only one man with him, Trigger. The two traveled in a plain rental car, without phones, without backup. Their destination was a disused warehouse in Digbeth, the industrial spine of Birmingham. Inside, Crown had prepared the space carefully. No cameras, no trackers. 3 chairs, 1 table, and nothing else. Crown wanted both leaders to feel equal, but not comfortable. He kept his tone neutral, his hands visible, and his presence minimal. Feek arrived shortly after, dressed in a long black coat, with no one at his side. Sledge, Crown was told, had remained in Dublin in case anything went wrong. At first, the conversation was cold and cautious. Feek wanted answers. Drex wanted proof of Red Eye's respect. Crown played referee, steering the conversation toward possibilities rather than problems. Over time, what began as subtle accusations shifted into a rough framework of cooperation. Feek proposed joint use of the Cork port for weapons coming in from Eastern Europe. In return, Drex would allow Red Eye Circle access to distribution lines in South London. The merger wouldn't be public. It would be controlled, silent, and temporary. But the meeting didn't stay secret. Unbeknownst to all 3 men, another player was lurking in the background. Elias Kerr, known by those who feared him as Madstone, had once been part of the Red Eye Circle. His exit was violent and personal. He had spent a year rebuilding in the shadows, creating a new outfit with no flags, no rules, and no loyalty. The Grim Block. Made up of former enforcers, outcasts, and defectors, the Grim Block didn't believe in alliances. They believed in destruction. Madstone had bribed one of Crown's assistants days earlier and learned of the warehouse meeting. He saw it as a chance to wipe the slate clean. If he could take out Drex, Feek, and Crown in one move, he would plunge 2 empires into chaos and rise from the ashes. As the leaders reached the final terms of their temporary agreement, the first shot echoed through the warehouse wall. Chaos erupted. Feek ducked behind the metal table. Drex pulled a small pistol from his coat and fired blindly toward the shadows. Trigger took a hit to the leg. Crown vanished through a side door, escaping into the dark alley outside. The Grim Block's gunmen, masked and silent, sprayed bullets through the walls before setting fire to the far end of the building. In the chaos, Drex and Feek managed to escape through different exits, bloodied but alive. Trigger was dragged out by a Smoke Boy scout who had been positioned nearby. The warehouse was engulfed in flames within minutes. No bodies were found. No official records ever acknowledged that the meeting had taken place. The ambush did more than disrupt a conversation. It rewrote the rules. In the days that followed, both Drex and Feek saw the truth. Someone wanted them dead, and it wasn't the police. The alliance, once built on suspicion and caution, was now cemented by blood. The enemy was not each other. It was something darker, more unpredictable, and already moving through their networks. The war hadn't been avoided. It had only changed shape. Inside the gray walls of an intelligence unit buried deep within the National Crime Agency's London headquarters, investigator Jolene Braith sat surrounded by surveillance monitors, digital maps, and stacks of classified files. Operation Raven had started as a slow, moving intelligence probe into a series of encrypted communications linked to unsolved murders in South London. But over the last year, it had grown into something far more complex. What Jolene had uncovered wasn't just another street gang or cross-border smuggling operation. It was the blueprint of a silent criminal empire stretching from London to Dublin, linked by corruption, encrypted channels, and almost zero public footprint. Jolene had served in the NCA for over 15 years. She had watched dozens of gangs rise and fall, but the Smoke Boys and the Red Eye Circle operated on a different frequency. There were no recorded calls, no obvious paper trails, no online bragging, and no cooperation from the public. Fear had sealed lips, and money had erased trails. Still, Jolene kept digging, and the deeper she went, the more disturbing the connections became. She pieced together the communication patterns from a network of burner phones, used only for 3 days at a time. The locations matched suspected drug drops, weapon sales, and even a few unsolved killings. But the breakthrough came when a suspicious traffic of messages overlapped with known police dispatch locations. Someone inside law enforcement was feeding the Smoke Boys advanced warnings. For months, the Met's Internal Affairs Division had suspected a mole but failed to identify them. Jolene narrowed it down to 3 possible officers. One name stood out, a senior detective with years of unblemished service and access to sensitive intel. She assigned him the codename Unit 7. To test her theory, Jolene arranged for fake intel to be logged in the system, a fake warehouse storing weapons supposedly linked to the Red Eye Circle. Within 2 days, that location had been raided, but not by police. Smoke Boys had hit it first, removing anything valuable before the NCA's own team even arrived. It confirmed what she feared. Unit 7 was real, active, and dangerously embedded. But Jolene didn't move immediately. She knew the moment the mole felt pressure, he would vanish. She needed more. Meanwhile, across the Irish Sea, her focus shifted to the port city of Cork, where the Red Eye Circle's smuggling operations were flourishing. Through intercepted messages, she identified a low-level dock worker named Leon Durkin. He had been quietly filming container transfers for months, gathering enough evidence to expose Feek's human trafficking network. Jolene's team pulled him into protective custody, relocating him to a safe house in rural Kerry. It was a temporary fix, but it was a start. She planned to extract him to England and present his testimony before Parliament. But before she could move him, Leon disappeared. No forced entry. No alarm tripped. Just silence. His safe house was empty, the only clue left behind a small pool of blood inside the freezer. The message was chilling and clear. Someone had found him, and they'd made sure no one else ever would. Jolene was furious, but more than that, she was afraid. Feek's network had eyes everywhere, even within her own agency. Operation Raven was collapsing under its own weight. The Smoke Boys were fortified with police intel, and the Red Eye Circle had silenced the one person willing to speak. Traditional strategies had failed. Jolene realized she needed to push both gangs off balance. She had to make them turn on each other. To do this, she created a false narrative. She leaked doctored files showing that Feek had been in contact with Unit 7, implying he was using the same mole feeding the Smoke Boys. She made sure this leak reached a handful of informants with ties to Drex. The goal was simple: make Drex believe Feek was playing both sides. Within a week, it worked. Drex's network pulled back from their shared routes, cut ties with the port, and went dark. Jolene watched as the quiet alliance cracked. In parallel, she set up a sting targeting one of Feek's lower-ranking lieutenants in Limerick. During the interrogation, a single text alert, just one, revealed a sliver of real-time communication between the Grim Block and a Red Eye arms supplier. That was enough to draw new legal authority. Raids began in Limerick and East London. Dozens were arrested, but most were foot soldiers. The real targets remained untouchable. Crown, the go-between, had gone missing. Jolene suspected he had fled, maybe tipped off by someone inside. Madstone, the leader of the Grim Block, was off-grid, operating like a ghost with no digital trace. Drex had retreated into silence, and Feek was doubling security across Ireland. Jolene's mission wasn't over, but she had shifted the balance. No longer operating in unison, the Smoke Boys and Red Eye Circle now moved with suspicion and distrust. The lines of communication between London and Dublin had fractured. That small tear was all Jolene needed. She wasn't expecting to dismantle the entire empire in one move. She just needed the empire to start crumbling from within. The fire that tore through the industrial estate in Belfast marked the final unraveling of a fragile alliance. What began as whispers of cooperation between two criminal empires had devolved into betrayal, bloodshed, and silence. In the early hours of a gray November morning, two armored vans belonging to the Red Eye Circle were ambushed while traveling through the Docks district. Inside were automatic rifles and several boxes of ammunition meant for an upcoming shipment. None of it made it to its destination. When the first responders arrived, the scene was already consumed by fire. One van had exploded. The second had been torched from the inside. On the ground beside the burning wreckage was a symbol spray painted in thick black strokes, an unmistakable image of a flame. This time, it was drawn upside down. To those who understood, it was clear the Smoke Boys had declared open war. Feek stood over the charred remains just hours later, escorted by a convoy of armed men. His face, always calm and unreadable, was tighter now. Anger didn't flicker on the surface, but it was there beneath the skin. He had known the alliance with Drex wouldn't last forever, but he had not expected it to collapse so fast, or so violently. The truth behind the attack, however, was more complicated. Drex hadn't ordered the strike directly. Paranoia and miscommunication had taken root in the aftermath of Jolene's deception. The false leaks suggesting Feek's connection to Unit 7 had reached one of Drex's lieutenants, and in the absence of answers, retaliation had become the default response. Drex, still reeling from the ambush in Birmingham and the death of several trusted men, gave no instruction. But others within his circle took silence as permission. The fallout was immediate. Within days, Feek placed a bounty on Drex's head, a 250,000 dead or alive. The offer spread fast through the underworld. Hitmen, rival gangs, and even former allies began sniffing around South London, hoping to collect. Drex responded by disappearing completely. He abandoned his known safe houses, left no digital trail, and took only a small number of trusted operatives with him. The war between the two giants sparked chaos throughout both cities. Smoke Boys turned their attention to shattering the Red Eye's remaining smuggling routes. They intercepted shipments, threatened collaborators, and exposed hidden stash houses. In response, Red Eye hit back with equal force, targeting anyone suspected of aligning with Southwark. Several independent dealers were murdered in Dublin and Galway. A Red Eye associate was shot in broad daylight on a busy London street, the first time either gang had dared to move so openly. But even as bodies fell and routes were severed, something larger was happening behind the scenes. Jolene Braith had returned with renewed authority. Using the violence as cover, she secured new funding, deployed undercover teams, and ramped up surveillance across known gang locations. Her agents infiltrated digital networks, tracked crypto wallets, and connected the dots between arms suppliers, property owners, and shell companies used to launder money. What she found was staggering. Over $30 million had been funneled through fake charities and construction firms. Both the Smoke Boys and Red Eye Circle had embedded themselves not just in crime, but in legitimate systems. The networks were sophisticated, and the reach extended far beyond just the UK and Ireland. Jolene's team launched synchronized raids, arresting dozens in Manchester, Glasgow, and Belfast. Small victories, but the giants remained untouchable. Then came the final blow. A car bomb detonated outside a safe house in Peckham where Drex's younger brother, Zane Cole, had been hiding. Zane wasn't part of the upper structure, but he was blood. The attack was brutal, sending a message no one could misread. The explosion leveled the building. Zane died instantly. Drex vanished from all networks. His lieutenants couldn't reach him. Some believed he had gone into exile. Others whispered he had died in retaliation shortly after. But no body was ever found. Feek, on the other hand, tried to hold what remained of his crew together. The heat from law enforcement was overwhelming. With ports compromised and routes exposed, his operation began to choke. In desperation, he fled to Marbella, Spain, where he hoped to lay low and regroup. But the Spanish authorities, working with the NCA, arrested him months later. Not for murder, not for smuggling, but for tax evasion. It was a quiet end for a man who once commanded fear across borders. As for Madstone and the Grim Block, they melted into the underground. Their role in triggering the collapse of two criminal empires went largely unnoticed by the public. But Jolene hadn't forgotten. Her next mission was already taking shape. The war had ended, not with a headline, but with a slow, grinding collapse. No peace treaties, no final shootout, just scattered remnants, charred symbols, and an eerie silence in the places once filled with smoke and flame. The most feared crews from London to Dublin had been exposed. Not by bullets alone, but by their own mistrust, their pride, and the people watching from the shadows.